Yeah, I can also read my own title. And title's not up on the screen yet. Okay, so my talk is entitled Surprised About the Expected, Electrophysiology Reveals Malleable Predictions. Prediction is important for a language for several different reasons. One is that language comes to us in this very rapid input stream. So we listen to about 200 syllables per minute. We read at speeds of about 250 words per minute. And therefore, as long as our predictions are correct, we tend to get a head start on processing this rapid input stream. Another reason participants read a sentence like, Alfonso has started biking to work instead of driving his car. Our car is very predictable. And then a few sentences later, we repeated the word car to probe its representation in memory. In the previously unpredictable condition, participants read a sentence like, Jason tried to make space for others by moving his car. And then a few sentences later, the word car was repeated in a fairly neutral sentence context. And in the not previously seen condition, the word car was presented for the first time in the experiment. And then we can look at the response to car in that final sentence, same word in the same sentence context. All that changed was what happened a few sentences ago. The results look as follows. We get the largest N400. So negative is plotted up here, time is on the x-axis, and this negativity in blue here is the N400. It's the largest size there because when you see a word for the first time in the experiment, there's a lot of new information to access in semantic memory. When a word was repeated, both in the previously predictable and the previously unpredictable case, the N400 response is much smaller. There's less information to access in memory, but this was most the case for previously unpredictable words. So words that had previously presumably been processed quite thoroughly compared with previously predictable words that only confirmed what participants were already expecting. So we see that prior unpredictability can increase word repetition effects on both the N400, and then there's also a later positivity, varietally distributed this time, which in the memory literature is referred to as a late positive complex and has been linked with recollection. So thinking of a prior episode of having seen the word previously, and that process seems to even only happen for the previously unpredictable words. So while that suggests that unpredictable words can boost memory, it doesn't yet quite capture learning. So the research question for the present study was whether prediction violations also lead to prediction updating. The current models of this process are difficult to test on the available data because those data tend to come from experiments that that investigated comprehension or maybe memory rather than learning. And studies haven't really measured the consequences of prediction violations for updating, especially of the predictive relationship between sentences as predictive cues and words as the input. And so we know little about whether when readers update their predictions, do they begin to now, say, expect the unexpected, so to speak, or do they and additionally also start to become surprised about the expected now that they have processed a prediction violation. So in this study, participants read sentences with expected or unexpected endings, like he swept the floor with a broom, or he swept the floor with a smile that still fits in the sentence context, but is unexpected. And I then simply repeated those sentence contexts, again, with either their expected or their unexpected ending in a fully crossed design that you can see on the top right. And the hypotheses are, if unexpected words lead to prediction updating, these prediction violations lead to prediction updating, then on second presentation of that same sentence context, this should, first of all, reduce prediction violation responses to unexpected words, because if there's learning, now the unexpected word should yield less prediction error. And also it should increase prediction violation responses, or prediction violation responses should begin to emerge in response to words that would normally be expected, because now a prediction violation has been processed and that should change the system. Some methods details. The expected words had a high close probability, so many participants would think that the expected word should follow the sentence if they're given the sentence context and asked to complete the sentence. And the unexpected words had a very low close probability. There were 40 participants, 40 sentences per condition. And the unexpected words, like smile, were highly plausible. So they scored 5.2 on a 7-point plausibility scale. And this is important for eliciting a frontal post-N400 positivity. There is another parietal effect that you get when you use outright semantic violations. But we were interested in that frontal positivity. And furthermore, the unexpected words were semantically unrelated as much as possible to the expected word. so that we get a clean N400 measurement. Then the sentence contexts were repeated once after a lag that randomly varied between 4 and 40 intervening trials. I chose those numbers to avoid immediate repetition, which could be quite salient to participants, but also to avoid very long lags where issues like memory decay could begin to play a role, and we don't know yet how long these effects, if they exist, would last. In terms of analyses, I used cluster-based permutation tests to quantify effects of prediction violation and word repetition, looking at the frontal post N400 positivity, also the N400, and then parietal late positive complex as well to look at those repetition effects. So here are the results at first presentation. They should look familiar. So at the top, I'm plotting a frontal earpiece at a frontal channel that show a post N400 positivity. In the middle, there is the earpiece at a parietal channel showing the N400 larger to unexpected than expected words, and at the bottom are the scalp topographies in the N400 and late positivity time window. And relative to expected words like broom, the unexpected words like smile elicited an N400 as well as this frontal post N400 positivity. I should say this is a between items comparison, so broom versus smile. But in this case, it's a manipulation check only. And in the following analyses, the main analyses, I will only compare expected words against expected words and unexpected words against unexpected words so that we are comparing across physically identical stimuli. So let's look at our main interest then was to look at second presentation endings as a function of what happened at the initial presentation of the sentence, right? And when looking at unexpected endings, these elicited a smaller post N400 positivity after unexpected endings than after expected endings. So smile after broom elicited a larger post N400 positivity than smile after smile. So there is, as hypothesized, a smaller frontal post N400 positivity after this prediction violation. And that's consistent with reduced prediction error. When looking at expected endings and comparing broom after broom versus broom after smile, there is a frontal post N400 positivity that is greater for after the prediction violation, and that is consistent with emerging prediction error now to expected endings. So what we're seeing here is that after a single recent encounter with a prediction violation, words that are entirely consistent with their sentence context, like broom, with their local sentence context, now begin to elicit a prediction violation-like response. In addition, on parietal channels, we see effects of word repetition. These are dissociable from post N400 positivities, as we'll see in the coming slides. They're dissociable in two ways. First, the post N400 positivity is different from the LPC and the N400, and that is also the case in our data. So if we compare first presentation unexpected endings against second presentation unexpected endings where it was a full sentence repetition, we see an N400 reduction and an LPC enhancement, but there isn't a significant frontal post N400 positivity. And also for expected words, there isn't a frontal post N400 positivity repetition effect when we're looking at broom after broom, essentially, and versus broom initial presentation. In fact, there wasn't a repetition effect here at all. I think that has to do with the constraint of the sentence contexts. So the contextual support was so strong for these expected items that essentially the memory access demands were already minimized, and then repeating the sentence didn't add much on top of that. So to summarize, mere repetition doesn't seem to explain the frontal post N400 positivity we saw on the previous slide. Another way to look at it is to go back to first presentation and to compare the prediction violation responses at second presentation, where on those switch trials where it goes from expected to unexpected, compare those to the first presentation unexpected instead. If we do that, we again see a frontal post-10 for 100 positivity after the prediction violation compared with the first presentation, confirming the results now with a different control condition, and arguably perhaps cleaner control condition where there hasn't been a repetition earlier. Each have their pros and cons. In this case, the first presentation does, of course, systematically occur earlier in the experiment than the second presentation. But the results converge whichever way we look at it. So this choice of control condition that avoids word repetition still produces the frontal post-10 for 100 positivity. That's also the case with expected endings. When we compare with the first presentation instead, we get a post-10 for 100 frontal positivity as well. Again, there's also an LPC, I think, that has to do with the sentence repetition, and where selectively for the second presentation, there is a first presentation that one could recollect and that one could retrieve and think back about, that isn't there for the first presentation when the sentence hadn't yet been presented. Okay, so to summarize then, a single recent encounter with a prediction violation seems to have downstream consequences that are consistent with prediction updating. For unexpected endings, we saw that these seem to elicit less prediction error after a prediction violation. And for expected endings that are entirely consistent with their local sentence context, they seem to begin to elicit this prediction violation-like response after having encountered this recent prediction violation. So at least for processes indexed by this frontal post-10 for 100 positivity, it seems that the predictive relationships between sentences and words are highly malleable. This has at least two implications for models of predictive language processing. First, I think they will need to account for this malleability, for example, using something like a learning rate. And second of all, I think these data highlight the importance of also looking at this frontal post-10 for 100 positivity. Many of these models tend to focus on the N400. Some include P600 as well. But I think it's worth modeling the frontal post-10 for 100 positivity as well. With that, I'd like to thank research assistants for data collection, as well as funding that made this project possible. And I'd like to thank you for your attention.
Does this work? Yeah. Thank you for your talk. Thank you for staying within time. And again, questions from staff and student.
Hello, Eitan Zweig, University of York. So when you presented, before you presented your data, you presented kind of the overall thing. You talked about expecting the unexpected versus, and what made me think is there's two ways to interpret that, right? There's a specific way regarding the sentences you had, right? So, oh, now I learned that smile is something that is expected in this context. And there's a meta prediction, right, which is maybe more task dependent, which is, I know that in this experiment or in this context, I presented with unexpected words, right? What do you think they were actually learning then in that context? I mean, I was trying to think through the data, and it's not clear to me that your experiment distinguishes those two. So, but I was wondering if you have any thoughts on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. We don't know at this point whether people are learning something specific to the experiment or something more general. But I think it's quite interesting to see that both effects play out on this frontal post-10 for 100 positivity. And at the first presentation, there hasn't been any repetition yet. And there, people clearly show this frontal post-10 for 100 positivity that must be driven by the experience, the lifetime of experience that they bring with them to the lab. And it's the same component that then gets influenced by the recent prediction violations that they encounter in the experiment, which suggests to me that at least there is something similar going on between learning in say the real world and figuring out stuff that happens in the experiment. And this might not be too different from, say, encountering a speaker who has a particular accent and you have to adapt to them as well, or other kinds of adaptations have to make and that are fairly natural. I hope that helps.
Okay, thank you very much. It's very interesting.
I'll keep the mask on. Chiara Gambi, University of Warwick.
Hi.
So thank you very much, really interesting data. Were you surprised that the effect showed up on the PNP only and not on the M400, given some theories, or well, also some data that, for example, M400 amplitude correlates with surprise low?
I wasn't surprised because we know that the M400 is quite insensitive to some manipulations of expectancy. For instance, it doesn't seem to care about the constraint of a sentence context when you read an unexpected word. Be careful because the top of the stove is very hot, is very dirty, I guess, where this confirms a specific expectation. You get a big N400 because there's new information to access. But if in a sentence context, like they looked around and saw A that could end in many different ways, it's very weakly constraining. You also just get a big N400 to the same kinds of unexpected word. So at least in the cognitive sense of surprise, I wasn't really expecting N400 differences much anyway, except to the extent that there would be differences in the amount of information that needs to be accessed in semantic memory. So I already wasn't expecting, say, an N400 to become bigger in any way. I think it helps to think of the N400 as kind of the default response when there is no context at all, and any context can then help to reduce it. But it doesn't necessarily, yeah, I wasn't expecting increases, but I'd be interested to see if there are theories that would expect this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We have time for one more question. So I guess I can ask something while you think about it. So I was wondering, this is really wondering whether you're planning similar experiments looking at different types of variables like syntactic expectations, and do you expect similar results, or do you also, I mean, when I say syntactic variables, it's obviously a large variety of things that you could be testing. So there's more lexical level kind of things and more abstract ones. And I wonder if you've been working on this.
I haven't been working on this yet, but that would be certainly a very interesting direction to take. There's some work using eye tracking and self-paced reading, looking at syntactic adaptations. I think there's less ERP work on that. There's also less of a specific syntactic ERP component to look at now that opinions have changed about the P600. And so, but certainly that'd be a very interesting direction to explore. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Joost.
Thank you.
As you know, for this conference, we decided to